Hello everyone, and welcome to another DIPPR tutorial. Today we will be going over how to use the DIPPR installer to install DIADEM as well as the DIPPR database if desired. To begin with, we will show you how to install DIADEM Elite on its own without using the database installer. You would go through this procedure if you had already installed the DIPPR database on a SQL server of your choice and only wanted to access the program so that you could connect to wherever you set up your SQL server. So this is useful if you have a central SQL server that you had installed the database to and you just want to get DIADEM Elite on your computer to access it. To do so, you'll want to have the DIADEM Elite Only installer from AICHE. To begin, you will simply right-click on the installer, Run as Administrator, enter your admin password, which has not been shown. And now we have entered the installer. So we will first click Next to begin the installation process. Now we can choose which users on the computer we want to install this for. So you can do it just for the current user or for all user accounts on the computer. We will do it for all user accounts for the purposes of this tutorial. Now we click Next. Here is the copyright license, basically just telling you to keep your contract and not to spread DIADEM beyond that. So we will click this checkbox to accept the terms of the agreement. And now we will click Next. Now we can choose if we want to customize our installation at all. If we do choose to do a custom installation, we can choose to install DIADEM or our documentation or both. DIADEM is the software itself. Documentation refers to a few little pieces of instruction on how to use DIADEM, some resources to help you use it in your engineering. Usually we recommend that you install both so that you have both the software and the resources to use it. And so for the purposes of this tutorial, that is what we will do. We will go back and click Install Now. Now we can choose if we want to place DIADEM in a different folder than normal. This is the default folder. Usually we would recommend keeping that as is. So that's what we will again do for the purposes of this tutorial. Now we click Next and we click Install. And there goes DIADEM. And there we go. Perfect. As you can see, DIADEM Elite has appeared on our desktop. We will now close out of the installer and open DIADEM Elite. Now we can connect to whatever pre-existing SQL server is present and use DIADEM as normal. Now we will move on to showing you how to install the database if you need to install both the DIADEM software and the current DIPPR database. To begin with, we will briefly review a little bit of information about SQL servers and how the database installation process interacts with them. SQL servers and SQL databases are very different from Access databases, as are used in DIADEM Pro. An Access database acts like most other types of files. It can be moved, manipulated, and shared quite easily. SQL databases are designed to be more difficult to interact with. Each SQL database is contained in a SQL server, which requires credentials to access. Additionally, only certain users can access and manipulate certain databases. This user-based permission scheme is usually managed by a company's IT department. The database installer is built to import the DIPPR SQL database to an existing SQL server. It is not designed to update existing databases. The installer comes with an encrypted backup of the DIPPR database in the form of a .dprdb file, which is a custom file extension. When the installer loads a database, it decrypts this file to retrieve a .back file, the standard file extension for SQL database backups. Then it loads the backup into the given SQL server so that it can be accessed by that server's users. This means that you either need to have a pre-existing SQL Server instance to import the DIPPR database into, or you need to create one as part of the installation process. For now, we will show you how to import to a pre-existing SQL Server instance. And then after that, we will show you how to create a new one to import to as part of the installation process. To install DIADEM Elite and the DIPPR database, you will need two files. You will need the DIADEM Elite installer, which is notably different from the DIADEM Elite only installer. This is the installer that contains the database. You will also need a license to use the DIPPR database, which you should have received from IYAHICON. To begin installing the DIPPR database to a pre-existing SQL Server, we will open the DIADEM Elite installer by right-clicking and running in as administrator. We will now go through the same process we did in the last section. We will click Next, install for all users, accept license terms, click Next again. We will click Install Now, then Next. Now we will click Install. And we will just let it do its thing. Now the database installer will open automatically. We can also see that DIADEM Elite has appeared on the desktop. We will open it. Here is the connection window. As you can see, it autofills localhost DIPPR in the server bar. Localhost DIPPR is the default SQL Server that DIADEM installs when you create a new SQL Server instance using this installer. We have already configured localhost DIPPR on this virtual machine. However, for your company, you would want to enter whatever SQL Server you're using to host the DIPPR database into this bar here. For now, we'll leave it as localhost DIPPR. And as you can see, we cannot find the current sponsor database. So we will now install the DIPPR database to localhost DIPPR. To do so, we'll return to the installer, and we will enter our license file through this window. We will click here. We will open our license from the desktop. Click OK. Now we see some dialog telling us how to go about installing the database. We will be doing option 1 right now and connecting to an existing instance of SQL Server. So now we click Configure SQL Server Connection. Localhost DIPPR has already been set up on this machine. Once again, you should enter whatever SQL Server your company is using into this bar here. If you're installing the database to another server, we can click Test Connection to make sure everything is working. Connection is successful, so we're good to go ahead. So now we click OK. Now these green check marks tell us that everything is good to go. So we can click Import and let the database go. And there we are. We have a successful import. So now we click OK. The installer closes automatically and we go back to DIADEM Elite. And this time when we click List Available Databases, we can see that the sponsor October 2024 database has loaded successfully. So now we can set our connection and use DIADEM Elite as normal. Now we will go over how to install a new SQL Server instance to import the DIPPR database onto. To do so, we will follow all of the previous steps up to this point in the installation process. We will close out of this dialog box. And now we will click Download and Install SQL Server Express. Now we should see this pop up with instructions on what to do next. If this doesn't come up and you instead see a pop-up that says you need to install .NET 3.5, go find the .NET 3.5 timestamp in the video description or the comment section and click on it and watch that instruction on how to deal with that pop-up. For now, we will continue to download and install SQL Server Express. We will not need SQL Server tools, and so we will click Download. And when this happens, the installer will automatically install and configure a new instance of SQL Server Express 2014. And it will take care of all the steps of naming it properly to localhost DIPPR and everything you could want it to do.
This progress bar sometimes takes quite a while to load.
Occasionally, if it freezes, you will need to do something else. And so in the event that this progress bar freezes for you, you will need to navigate to the frozen progress bar timestamp in the video description or comment section to figure out what to do next. Now we should see a pop-up that says import successful once everything has finished. And we can click OK, and the installer should automatically close.
I opened a few extra windows during recording for the appendix troubleshooting, so I will go ahead and close those.
Now, if we go over to DIADEM Elite, we will be able to set our connection to localhost/DIPPR and to the newly imported sponsor database, and proceed to use DIADEM Elite as normal.
The rest of this video will be an appendix to help you with troubleshooting and to go over any other situations that we think might come up for you or your company. So if you have any questions that haven't been resolved, check the timestamps in the video description or in the comment section down below, and hopefully something in the appendix will resolve whatever is going wrong with the installer or whatever questions you might have. As always, if you have any questions, please reach out to support.dipper@byu.edu on Zendesk, and we will do our best to get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you so much for watching this video, and until next time, enjoy DIADEM Elite.
Occasionally, when you click this button, you will see the following pop-up. SQL Server requires .NET 3.5 SB1 and some instructions on how to turn it on. We will go over these so that if you see this, you know how to address it. So as you can see, it says to start control panel, which we will do. We will now follow the instructions and go to programs. We will go to turn Windows features on or off. We will check the following box here. .NET Framework 3.5 includes .NET 2.0 and 3.0. And then we will click OK. Sometimes this will tell you to reboot your computer when it's done. We'll see if it does that. For now, we will let Windows download the required files and wait for it to finish doing what it needs to do. Once that has finished, which can take a little while, if we don't get a prompt to restart our computer, we can close and exit all of these windows here. Now, you will not always be so lucky to not have to restart your computer and this happens. So in the event that it does, we will now go over how to reopen the database installer from a fresh restart without running through the entire installer again. To do so, we will navigate to wherever we installed our DIPPR files. By default, that is under Program Files, DIPPR 801, DIADEM Elite. And we will open Databases, Sponsor SQL, and we will open DIPPR ADM, which is the database installer. Now we will click Install New Database, and the database installer will open, and it will ask us for the license file again, which we can provide here. We've now enabled .NET 3.5, and so we will continue on from here with the installation process. As you can see here in this instance, the progress bar has frozen. Thankfully, there is a way around this To get around the frozen progress bar, we will click Select, and we will select a
SQL Server 2014
installer to use to install the SQL Server, and it will automatically configure everything. So to do that, we'll go to Downloads. The installer has helpfully downloaded the SQL Express installer. We will click Open. We will allow this to make changes to our device, and we will see another progress bar, which is a little bit more cooperative than the previous one. We will once again allow SQL Server 2014 to make changes to our device. And now we will see a command prompt as configuration begins, followed by another pop-up as configuration continues.
And that is all done. Now we can go and use DIADEM Elite just as we were doing previously.
If you would like to use a more current version of SQL Server, then feel free to download one from the Microsoft website. And now we will show you how to install the DIPPR database onto one of those versions of SQL Server. So in this instance, it's most convenient for you to have SQL Server Management Studio already installed on your computer, because then you will be able to see how the database you have installed has been configured. So as you can see here, I have a newly installed SQL Express version. This is SQL Server Express 2022. This is the name of the server. You will need this in order to import the database. As you can see, there are currently no databases. So to begin, I will go to Properties, and I will find the name of the server, and I will copy it. Now I will move over to the database installer, and I will click Configure SQL Server Connection, and I will input this name. Now I can test connection. Our connection is successful, so I click OK, import, and let the installer do what it needs to do. We have successfully imported, so now we click OK, close out of DIPPR ADM, and we now refresh in SQL Server Management Studio, and here's the database. We have successfully installed the DIPPR database to our new SQL Express SQL Server that we retrieved from Microsoft. Now, in order to use this server in DIADEM, I would once again simply go to Properties and copy the name, and I would input this into DIADEM Elite's connection window. Let's say that for whatever reason, you don't want to install the database onto a SQL server. You simply want to have a backup file of the SQL database available to you, perhaps to pass on to your DBA so that they can then install it on a SQL server. If you want to do that and just get a backup, then you would click this Decrypt Only checkbox during installation. This will now ask you for a path to where you want to put your .back file. So for now, we'll just put it on our desktop. We'll click OK, and we will now click Import. And as you can see, we now have a simple decrypted .back backup file of the October 2024 sponsored database available to us to do whatever we might need to do to work with our DBA. And we can now import this to SQL through SQL Server Management Studio, or do whatever else we need to do with it.